The cold November rain had driven Mira Frost into the most reckless decision of her 23 years, breaking into a penthouse apartment to sleep for one night. She stood shivering in the emergency stairwell of the obsidian tower, water dripping from her second-hand coat onto the concrete floor, staring at the door marked PH, with a mixture of desperation and determination. 3 days sleeping on park benches had left her exhausted, scared, and willing to risk anything for a few hours of warmth and safety. The lock picked easier than she expected, her fingers trembling as she worked the thin metal tools her former roommate had taught her to use before disappearing 6 months ago. The door swung open silently, revealing darkness so complete it felt like stepping into another world entirely. Mira hesitated only a moment before slipping inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the vast space. Emergency lights from the city filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The penthouse sprawled before her like something from a dream, all dark wood and leather furniture, paintings that looked centuries old, and a stillness that pressed against her skin like cold water. Everything felt untouched, preserved, as if time moved differently here than in the world below. Her wet shoes squeaked against marble floors as she crept deeper inside, past a kitchen with gleaming black countertops, through a living area with furniture that probably cost more than she had earned in her entire life, down a hallway lined with closed doors. She tried the first one and found a bathroom larger than her childhood bedroom. The second revealed a library with books stacked floor to ceiling, their leather spines cracked with age. The third door opened onto a bedroom that stole her breath. The bed dominated the space, an enormous four-poster affair draped in deep burgundy silk that seemed to absorb what little light reached it. Everything else faded to insignificance: the antique wardrobe, the velvet chairs, the ornate mirror that reflected her bedraggled appearance back at her. She knew she should leave, find somewhere else, anywhere else, but her body had reached its limit. 3 days without real sleep, a week before that in a shelter where her belongings had been stolen, months of barely surviving in a city that chewed up people like her and spit out the bones. Mira kicked off her soaked shoes and peeled away her damp coat, leaving them by the door where she could grab them quickly if needed. She approached the bed like it might vanish if she moved too fast, running one hand over silk so soft it felt like touching water. The mattress gave beneath her weight as she climbed onto it, and she bit back a sound that was half sob, half sigh of relief. She told herself she would rest for just an hour, maybe 2, then slip away before dawn. The penthouse felt empty in a way that suggested no one had been here in weeks, maybe longer. She would be gone before anyone knew she had existed. This single night of comfort would sustain her, give her the strength to figure out her next move, find a real job, get her life back on track somehow. The silk sheets welcomed her like an embrace as she curled into a tight ball in the center of the massive bed, her body finally warm for the first time in days. Exhaustion crashed over her in waves, pulling her under before she could second-guess her decision or plan her escape route. She barely registered the scent that clung to the bedding, something rich and unfamiliar, like incense and old books in winter nights. Within minutes, she had fallen into the deepest sleep she had known in months, dreamless and dark and complete. She never heard the penthouse door open hours later, never heard the footsteps that moved through the rooms with predatory grace, or the sudden stillness that fell when those footsteps paused outside the bedroom, never sensed the presence that stood in the doorway for a long moment, perfectly motionless, before stepping inside. Vladislav Drăculești, vampire king of the Eastern bloodline and lord of the Midnight Court, stared at the human girl curled up in his bed with an expression that would have terrified anyone who knew him well enough to recognize it. Not anger, though that would come. Not hunger, though the scent of her blood sang through his veins like music he had not heard in centuries. No, what crossed his pale aristocratic features was something far more dangerous: curiosity. In 347 years, no one had dared enter his private sanctuary uninvited. The tower had protections, wards that should have turned away any human with ill intent, defensive magic woven into its very foundation. Yet here lay a girl, small and fragile and completely unaware, sleeping in his bed as if she belonged there. Her dark hair spread across his pillows in tangled waves, and even in sleep, he could see the shadows beneath her eyes, the hollow of her cheeks, the way she curled around herself as though expecting the world to strike at any moment. He moved closer, silent as death itself, until he stood beside the bed looking down at her. She wore clothes that had seen better years, thin and worn and still slightly damp. One of her hands pillowed her cheek, fingers curled like a child's, and he noticed the dirt under her nails, the raw places on her knuckles, signs of a life lived hard and without mercy. Vladimir could have killed her a dozen different ways before she even woke, could have called his guards, his council, let them deal with this unprecedented breach of security and protocol. Instead, he did something he had not done in longer than he could remember. He sat down in the chair beside his bed and simply watched her sleep, trying to understand what force in the universe had brought a homeless human girl into the heart of his carefully controlled world. She slept for hours. He watched the entire time, motionless as a statue, his mind working through possibilities and implications. Dawn came and went outside the blackout curtains, the sun rising over a city that would never see him walk through its daylight streets. The penthouse remained in its perpetual twilight, and still the girl slept on, her breathing deep and even, her heartbeat a steady drum that called to instincts he had learned to master centuries ago. When she finally began to stir, the sun had already passed its zenith and begun its descent toward evening. Vladimir remained in his chair, deciding in that moment not to move, not to speak, to let her wake naturally and see what she would do when she realized she was not alone. Mira surfaced from sleep slowly, her body protesting even the simple act of consciousness after so long without proper rest. Warmth surrounded her, silk against her skin, and for a moment she forgot where she was, luxuriating in the simple comfort of a real bed. Then memory crashed back, and her eyes flew open, heart suddenly racing as the magnitude of what she had done crystallized in her mind. The bedroom looked different in the dim light, more real somehow, more dangerous. She started to sit up, preparing to grab her shoes and run when she saw him. A man sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her with eyes that seemed to catch what little light existed and throw it back in shades of silver. No, not a man. Everything about him screamed otherness, from his skin that seemed to glow with its own luminescence, pale as moonlight on snow, to his hair that fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, to the way he held himself with a stillness that no living thing should be able to achieve. Mira's scream caught in her throat, emerging as a strangled gasp as she scrambled backward, tangling in the silk sheets. She hit the headboard hard enough to rattle the wood, but there was nowhere else to go, no escape with him between her and the door. "Please," she managed, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm sorry, I'll leave right now. I just needed somewhere warm for one night. Please don't call the police." Vladimir tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a predator examining unusual prey. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent she could not place, something old and formal and deeply unsettling. "The police would be of little use to you now. They do not patrol my domain." "Your domain?" Mira's mind raced, trying to understand. "This is your apartment?" "I'm so sorry. I thought it was empty. Abandoned, maybe. I'll go right now. I won't tell anyone, I promise." She started to edge toward the side of the bed, but he raised one hand in a gesture that stopped her as effectively as a wall. Not threatening exactly, but commanding in a way that made her body obey before her brain could protest. "You will remain where you are until I understand how you breached my defenses." His eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign of emotion on his perfectly controlled face. "What manner of creature are you, that you could pass through wards meant to repel any with darkness in their heart?" "I'm not a creature, I'm just a person." Fear made her bold, or maybe just reckless. "I picked the lock, I walked in, there weren't any alarms or anything. Look, I know breaking and entering is illegal. But I wasn't going to steal anything, I just needed to sleep somewhere safe for a few hours. You obviously have money, you won't miss anything. I didn't touch anything except the bed." Something flickered in his expression, too fast for her to read. "You picked the lock?" "Yes." "And walked past the threshold of your own free will?" "Yes." Confusion joined her fear, making her voice sharp. "Why do you keep saying it like that?" Vladimir leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxing slightly in a way that was somehow more frightening than his earlier intensity. Because the threshold is bound with magic that should have turned you away, sent you fleeing with inexplicable terror, or at the very least made you forget you had ever seen this door. Yet you entered, slept in my bed for, he glanced at the window, approximately 14 hours and felt safe enough to achieve deep REM sleep cycles. Fascinating. Magic isn't real. Mira said it automatically, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. She had broken into an apartment owned by a man who looked like something from a Gothic painting, whose stillness was too complete, whose skin was too pale, whose eyes seemed to see through her in ways that made her feel transparent. No? He smiled then, and she saw his teeth, the incisors slightly too long, too sharp. Perhaps you should reconsider that position. The world tilted sideways for a moment, reality restructuring itself around a truth that should have been impossible. Mira had grown up on stories, vampire movies, Gothic novels, but those were fiction, entertainment, not something that existed in a world of cell phones and traffic jams and student debt. Yet looking at the being before her, she could not deny what her instincts screamed at her to understand. "You're a vampire." It was not a question. "I am the vampire," he corrected, something like pride entering his tone. "Vladislav Drăculești, king of the Eastern bloodline, lord of the Midnight Court, master of shadows and blood." He paused, watching her face carefully. "And you are an exhausted human girl who somehow walked past my defenses and fell asleep in my bed as though you had every right to be here. Which means you are either incredibly stupid, incredibly powerful, or touched by something beyond your understanding. I'm definitely the first one." Mira tried to make it sound light, but her voice shook. "Look, I don't know anything about magic or wards or whatever. I'm just homeless and tired, and I made a bad decision. I'll leave right now, and you'll never see me again." She started to move again, but this time he stood, and the movement was wrong, too fast, as though he had simply appeared standing rather than rising from the chair. He was between her and the door before she could blink, and she understood with sudden clarity that she had never had the option to leave, not really, not from the moment she had woken to find him watching her. "You misunderstand," he said softly. "I cannot simply let you leave. You know what I am now. You have been inside the heart of my sanctuary, and more importantly, you are a puzzle that I have not yet solved. So what are you going to do?" The question came out steadier than she felt. "Kill me?" Vladimir considered her for a long moment, his head tilted again in that unsettling predatory manner. "That would be the traditional response, the safe response. But you interest me, Mira Frost." "How do you know my name?" Ice ran down her spine. He gestured toward her coat, still lying where she had left it by the door. "Your identification was in your pocket. I took the liberty of investigating while you slept." He moved back to the chair, giving her space, perhaps recognizing that she was close to bolting, despite the futility of such an action. "No permanent address, no employment, no family in the city. You have been invisible for months, falling through the cracks of human society. No one would miss you if you disappeared." It was true, devastatingly true. And hearing it stated so baldly made something crack inside her chest. "Is that supposed to make me feel better about you killing me?" "I am not going to kill you." He sat again, crossing one leg over the other in a gesture that looked elegant and old-fashioned. "Not yet, at least. First, I need to understand how you managed to enter my domain when every magical defense I possess should have prevented it. Then I need to understand why you have been sleeping in my bed for hours, and I have felt no compulsion to drain you dry, which is unusual to say the least. Maybe you're just not hungry?" Mira knew she should be more terrified, should be screaming or crying or trying to fight, but exhaustion and the sheer unreality of the situation had pushed her past fear into a strange kind of numbness. "I am always hungry." The way he said it made her shiver, but not entirely with fear. "It is the nature of what I am. Yet with you the hunger is muted, bearable. I can smell your blood, hear your heart, and while I certainly want to feed, there is no frenzy, no loss of control. You are either magically protected by forces you do not understand, or you possess some quality that influences vampiric instinct on a fundamental level." "Great. I'm weird even to vampires," she laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "That's perfect. That fits my life perfectly." Vladimir watched her with those unreadable eyes, and she realized he had not blinked once since she had woken. "Tell me how you came to be here. All of it. Start with why you are homeless. Does it matter? Humor me." Mira pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a defensive posture. Something about the way he asked, without threat or judgment, made her want to answer. Or maybe she just needed to talk to someone, anyone, even a vampire who might kill her when the conversation ended. "I came to the city for college 2 years ago," she began, staring at the silk sheets rather than meeting his gaze. "Had a full scholarship, a roommate, everything was going okay. Then my mom got sick and I had to choose between paying for her care or staying in school. I chose her." Her throat tightened. "She died anyway, 6 months ago. By then I had dropped out, lost my scholarship, couldn't afford rent. My roommate let me stay on her couch for a while, but then she disappeared one night and never came back. Her name was on the lease, so I got evicted." "And you have no other family?" "My mom was it. Dad died when I was little. No siblings, no aunts or uncles who gave a damn." She shrugged, trying to make it seem like it did not matter, like she had not spent every day since her mother's death feeling utterly alone in the world. "I've been trying to get back on my feet, but it's hard to get a job when you don't have an address or clean clothes or anywhere to shower. Everything just kept getting worse, and then it was so cold last night, and the shelters were full, and I was walking past this building and thought, maybe, just maybe I could break into one of the expensive apartments and sleep somewhere warm for one night without getting caught." "So, you chose the penthouse." There was something like amusement in his tone now. "The most protected, most warded, most impossible apartment in the entire tower." "I didn't know that. I just picked the highest one because I figured rich people who can afford penthouses probably also have second homes they never use." She finally looked at him again. "How was I supposed to know vampires were real and lived in downtown high-rises? Most of humanity is quite unaware of our existence. We prefer it that way." He steepled his fingers, a gesture that looked like it came from a different century. "Though your ignorance makes your breach even more inexplicable. The wards should work on anyone, regardless of their knowledge of the supernatural. Maybe your wards are broken." "They are not." The certainty in his voice left no room for argument, which means the problem, or perhaps the answer, lies with you. They sat in silence for a moment, Mira trying to process everything, Vladimir watching her with that unnerving intensity. The situation felt surreal, impossible, yet the solid reality of the bed beneath her and the vampire before her could not be denied. "So what happens now?" she asked finally. "Are you going to keep me prisoner until you figure out your magical mystery? Turn me into a vampire? Use me for food?" "I have not yet decided." He rose again, this time moving at a normal human pace, perhaps trying not to spook her further. "But you are clearly in need of basic care. When did you last eat?" The question surprised her. "Yesterday morning. A woman at a coffee shop gave me her leftover muffin." His expression darkened, though whether from anger or something else she could not tell. "You will shower and change into clean clothes. I will have food brought up. Then we will continue this conversation with you in a better state to think clearly. I don't have clean clothes. I will provide them." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Do not attempt to leave, Mira Frost. You would not make it past the lobby, and it would displease me greatly to have to chase you through my city." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click, and Mira was alone in the bedroom of a vampire king, trying to understand how her life had become something from a supernatural romance novel in the span of a single night. She sat frozen for several minutes, half convinced she had fallen asleep on a park bench somewhere, and this was all a hypothermic fever dream. But the silk beneath her hands felt too real, the warmth too genuine. Slowly, she uncurled herself and slid off the bed, her body aching from days of sleeping rough. The bathroom attached to the bedroom was larger than some apartments she had lived in, all black marble and gold fixtures, and a shower that looked like something from a luxury spa. Mira stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the girl looking back, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with tangled hair and skin that had not seen proper care in months. She looked like a ghost, something already half dead, and maybe that was why Vladislav had not killed her immediately. Maybe she looked too pathetic to bother with. She found the shower controls after a moment of confusion and stood under water so hot it turned her skin pink, using soap that smelled like sandalwood and watching weeks of grime swirl down the drain. She washed her hair 3 times, working out the tangles with expensive conditioner, and only stepped out when the water finally began to cool. A stack of clothes waited on the counter that had definitely not been there before. She jumped, looking around the empty bathroom, but no one appeared. Vampire magic, probably. The clothes fit her perfectly, soft black leggings and an oversized sweater that felt like wearing a cloud, along with undergarments that were her exact size and made her very aware that a vampire king had somehow known her measurements. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, she found the bedroom empty, but heard sounds from deeper in the penthouse. Following the smell of food, she made her way back through the halls to the kitchen, where Vladislav stood over the stove, cooking eggs with a competence that seemed incongruous with his regal bearing and supernatural nature. "You cook?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He glanced at her and she thought she saw approval flicker across his features as he took in her clean-fed appearance. "I have had centuries to learn many skills, though I have no need to eat human food myself." He plated the eggs along with toast, bacon, and fresh fruit that must have cost a fortune this time of year. "Sit." Mira sat at the kitchen island, eyeing the food warily. "How do I know you didn't poison it?" "If I wanted you dead, you would be dead. Poison would be unnecessarily complicated." He poured her a glass of orange juice and set it before her. "Eat, Mira. You are no use to me if you faint from malnutrition." She picked up the fork, and the first bite of hot food nearly made her weep. She had not realized how hungry she was until flavor exploded across her tongue, and then she was eating without thought, shoveling food into her mouth with shaking hands while Vladislav watched from across the counter. "Slowly," he said quietly. "You will make yourself sick." She forced herself to slow down, but could not stop entirely until the plate was empty and her stomach felt almost painfully full. Only then did she look up to find him still watching her with that unsettling focus. "Thank you," she said, because her mother had raised her with manners even if everything else had fallen apart. "You are welcome." He leaned against the counter, his white hair catching the overhead light like a halo. "Now, we need to discuss your future." "My future?" A cold knot formed in her chest. "What future? You said yourself I can't leave because I know too much." "Correct. However, I am not in the habit of keeping prisoners, and you have committed no crime against me or my kind beyond the rather extraordinary feat of breaching my defenses." He drummed his fingers on the counter, a gesture that seemed almost human. "I propose an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "You will remain here in this penthouse under my protection. In exchange, you will submit to testing so that I may understand why my wards failed to repel you. You will also assist me with a matter that requires a human presence." Mira stared at him. "You want me to live here? With you? A vampire?" "I am aware of what I am." A hint of amusement colored his words. "And yes, that is what I am proposing. You need sanctuary and resources. I need answers and occasional human assistance. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement." "And if I say no?" His expression went carefully neutral. "Then I will have to make other arrangements for you, and I promise you will find them far less pleasant. The Midnight Court has protocols for humans who learn of our existence. Most involve memory alteration, which is imprecise and often leaves the subject damaged. Some require more permanent solutions. So it is not really a choice at all. Life rarely offers genuine choices, only options with varying degrees of consequence." He moved around the counter, and she tensed, but he simply pulled out the stool beside her and sat, bringing them nearly eye to eye. "I am trying to be reasonable, Mira. You stumbled into my world through no fault of your own, and I recognize that. But I cannot simply let you walk away, not when your presence here suggests something unusual is at work. Stay, let me figure out why you could enter my domain, and I will ensure you want for nothing. Except freedom. You had freedom. It left you sleeping in doorways and stealing food." His voice turned sharp. "What I am offering is far better than what you had." He was right. and she hated that he was right. 3 days ago, she would have sold her soul for a warm bed and regular meals. Now, a vampire was offering exactly that, and all it would cost was her autonomy and possibly her life if he ever got tired of studying her like a lab specimen. "What kind of testing?" she asked carefully. "Nothing invasive. I will have my court mage examine you for magical affinity. We will experiment with various wards and barriers to see which ones you can bypass. Perhaps some blood work to rule out supernatural ancestry." He shrugged. "Academic pursuits, not torture." "And this human assistance you mentioned?" "The vampire world occasionally requires interaction with the human one in ways that are complicated for my kind. Documentation, daylight errands, social situations where a human presence is necessary." He studied her face. "You would be my liaison, of sorts, my connection to the daylight world." It did not sound terrible, certainly better than freezing to death in a gutter somewhere. But living with a vampire, being in constant proximity to a predator who had admitted he wanted to feed on her, seemed like asking for disaster. "How do I know you will not just drain me dry the moment it is convenient?" "You do not," he said simply. "You must trust that I am a creature of my word, and when I make a bargain, I honor it. I swear to you, Mira Frost, that as long as you remain under my protection and uphold your end of our arrangement, I will not feed from you without your explicit consent, nor will I allow harm to come to you from any other source." The formality of his phrasing suggested the words carried weight beyond their literal meaning, some kind of magical binding perhaps. She wanted to refuse, wanted to demand he let her go, but she was not stupid enough to think she had real options here. "Okay," she said finally. "I will stay. I will help with your testing and your human world problems. But I want boundaries. I want my own room, my own space where you do not just appear whenever you feel like it." "Agreed. The bedroom you slept in will be yours. I will have additional clothes and necessities provided." He extended his hand, pale and elegant. "Do we have an accord?" She looked at his hand for a long moment before taking it. His skin was cool, not cold exactly, but several degrees below human normal. When they shook, she felt the controlled strength in his grip, the sense that he could crush her bones without effort, but chose not to. "We have an accord," she echoed, and wondered if she had just made a deal with the devil. The next week passed in a strange blur of adjustment and discovery. True to his word, Vladislav gave her the master bedroom, apparently moving his own resting place to somewhere else in the penthouse that he did not specify. She suspected vampires did not actually sleep in beds, but she did not ask. The room filled with clothes in her size, toiletries, books, even a laptop with unlimited internet access. He set no restrictions on her communication with the outside world, though she had no one to contact anyway. The court mage arrived on the third day, a severe woman named Thana who looked ancient and powerful and studied Mira like something she might dissect given permission. She performed tests that involved crystals and chanting and making Mira walk through various magical barriers that apparently Thana could see, but Mira could not. "Fascinating," Thana declared after hours of examination. "The girl has no magical ability whatsoever. She is completely mundane, depressingly normal in terms of supernatural affinity." "Then why can she pass through wards meant to repel humans?" Vladislav demanded. He had watched the entire examination from a leather chair in the corner, motionless and focused. "I do not know." Thana packed away her crystals with sharp, irritated movements. "Her blood shows no supernatural ancestry. She has no protective charms or spells woven into her aura. By all measures, she should be unable to enter any protected vampire sanctuary, let alone the most heavily warded penthouse in the city." The mage turned to study Mira again, her eyes narrowing. "Unless." "Unless what?" Mira asked nervously. "Unless you are so utterly insignificant that the wards do not register you as a threat at all." Thana said it clinically, without cruelty, but the words still stung. "Wards key on intent and capability. You possess neither darkness of intent nor capability to harm. You are so harmless, so powerless, that you essentially do not exist to magical defenses calibrated to detect danger." Silence filled the room. Mira felt her face flush with humiliation, the confirmation of what she had felt for months made literal and magical. She was nothing, No one, so insignificant that even supernatural security systems could not be bothered to notice her. That will be all, Thana. Thank you for your assessment. Vladislav's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He rose and escorted the mage to the door with a hand on her elbow that looked polite but was probably a demand. When he returned, he found Mira still standing where Thana had left her, staring at nothing, her arms wrapped around herself. She is wrong, Vladislav said quietly. She is right. You know she is right. Mira's voice came out hollow. I am nobody. Nothing. So pathetic that magic cannot even see me. No. He crossed the room to stand before her, and for the first time since she had met him, he touched her deliberately, placing one cool hand under her chin and tilting her face up to meet his eyes. Thana is old and powerful and sees the world only in terms of magical significance. She cannot comprehend that value might exist outside supernatural hierarchy. What value do I have? The question emerged bitter, broken. I have nothing. I am nothing. I could not even save my own mother. You survived. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the gesture unexpectedly gentle. You survived loss and grief and months of hardship that would have broken most humans. You did what was necessary to stay alive, including breaking into a vampire's penthouse because you were brave enough or desperate enough to try. That is not nothing. Mira. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words soothe the ache that Thana had opened in her chest. But it was hard. So hard to see value in herself when the world had spent months showing her she had none. Why do you care? She whispered. Why does it matter to you what I think of myself? Vladislav's hand dropped away, and he stepped back, something like confusion crossing his features before he smoothed them back to neutral. I am uncertain, he admitted. You should be nothing to me. Food at best, and inconvenience at worst. Yet I find myself concerned with your well-being beyond the practical need to keep you healthy for testing. Is that normal? For vampires? No. He turned away, moving to the window to look out at the city lights. We are not known for our compassion toward humans. They are resources, prey, occasionally useful servants. What I feel regarding you is unusual. What do you feel? He was silent for a long moment, his white hair gleaming in the reflected light. Protective, he said finally. Possessive, as though you have become something I must keep safe despite all logic and instinct. It is unsettling. Mira processed this, trying to understand, She should be terrified, should see his possessiveness as the dangerous obsession of a predator. Instead, some part of her felt warm at the admission, glad that she mattered to someone, even if that someone was an immortal creature of the night. Maybe I am broken too, she said softly, because that does not scare me as much as it should. He turned back to face her, his expression intense. Perhaps we are both broken in complementary ways. Something shifted between them in that moment, an understanding or acknowledgement of the strange connection growing in the space where captor and captive should have stood instead. Mira did not know what to call it, only that she felt it like a physical pull, drawing her toward a vampire who should have been her doom. The days turned into weeks, and gradually Mira began to help Vladislav with the human world tasks he had mentioned. She signed for deliveries during daylight hours, handled phone calls with human businesses that refused to operate at night, researched information on the internet that apparently vampires found confusing despite their immortality. He paid her generously, depositing money into a new bank account he had established in her name, more than she had ever earned in her brief working life. I do not need to be paid, she protested after the first transfer. You are already providing everything I need. You need independence, he countered, the ability to leave if you choose, to know this is your decision to stay rather than captivity. The money is yours to do with as you wish. She started small, ordering books, clothes she actually picked herself, donations to the shelters that had helped her when she had nothing. Then, she paid off her mother's remaining medical bills, clearing the debt that had haunted her for months. Vladislav never commented on how she spent the money, but she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that might have been approval. She learned his patterns, the way he rose at sunset and moved through the penthouse like a restless ghost until dawn, the hours he spent in his library reading books in languages she did not recognize, the nights he left for what he called court business and returned smelling of old stone and stranger things. He never brought anyone else to the penthouse, maintaining it as a private sanctuary that apparently no other vampire had access to. "Do you have friends?" she asked one night while they sat in the living room, her reading a novel while he worked through paperwork that apparently even vampire kings could not escape. "Other vampires you are close to?" He looked up from his documents, considering the question. "I have allies, subordinates, rivals. Friendships is not a concept that translates well to vampire politics." "That sounds lonely." "I have been alone for 3 centuries. I'm accustomed to it." But something in his voice suggested the loneliness bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "What about before you were a vampire? Did you have family, friends, people you cared about?" His expression darkened, and she thought he might not answer. Then, slowly, he set aside his paperwork and leaned back in his chair. "I was the 3rd son of a minor noble family in what is now Romania. My father wanted me to join the church. My brothers despised me as competition. My mother died when I was young. When the vampire who sired me offered immortality and power, I saw no reason to refuse." He stared at nothing, lost in memory. "I did not understand the cost until after the transformation, when I returned to my family estate, and they looked at me with terror instead of recognition." "Did you hurt them?" "No, but I could have, so easily, and they knew it. They drove me away with crosses and prayers, and I never returned." His eyes refocused on her. "That was 347 years ago. Everyone I knew as a human has been dust for centuries. Loneliness becomes normal when you outlive everything." Mira set her book aside and moved to sit on the floor beside his chair, drawn by an impulse she did not fully understand. "I am sorry. That sounds awful. It is simply the nature of immortality." He looked down at her, and she saw something vulnerable flicker across his face before he controlled it. "Though it has been less lonely since you arrived." "Really?" "Really." His hand moved as if to touch her hair, then stopped. "You confuse me, Mira Frost. You should be terrified, plotting escape, yet you sit beside me as though I am not a monster." "Maybe you are not as much of a monster as you think." She met his eyes, holding his gaze despite the instinct that warned her to look away. "You could have killed me that first night. Instead, you fed me, clothed me, gave me safety and purpose. Monsters do not do that. Some might say keeping you here makes me exactly a monster. Some might say I am staying by choice now." It was true, she realized. Somewhere in the past weeks, her captivity had transformed into something else, something she did not have a name for yet. She could probably leave if she truly wanted to, could walk out the door with the money he had given her and start over somewhere else. But she did not want to. This penthouse, this strange life with a vampire king, felt more like home than anywhere she had been in years. Vladislav's hand finally completed its motion, his cool fingers threading through her hair gently. "You should want to leave." "Probably." She leaned into his touch without thinking. "But I do not." They stayed like that for a long moment, the silence comfortable rather than tense, something unspoken but acknowledged building in the space between them. When he finally drew his hand back, she felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. The turning point came on a Thursday night 6 weeks after Mira had broken into the penthouse. Vladislav had left for court business hours before, and she had settled in for a quiet evening of reading when the penthouse door crashed open with a violence that shook the walls. 3 vampires swept into the living room before Mira could even stand, all pale skin and dark clothes and eyes that glowed with predatory hunger. She scrambled backward, her heart racing, as the largest of them, a man with silver hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, advanced on her. "So this is the human pet Vladislav has been hiding," he said, his accent thick and Slavic. "The entire court whispers about the girl living in his penthouse, the human who somehow breached his defenses. I came to see if the rumors were true." "Get out," Mira managed, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Vladislav will kill you for coming here." "Vladislav is occupied with the council for hours yet." The vampire moved faster than she could track, suddenly standing directly before her, his cold hand gripping her chin painfully. "Plenty of time to satisfy my curiosity about what makes you so special, though I must say, you smell absolutely divine." Terror flooded her system as she felt his breath on her neck, felt the scrape of fangs against her skin. She tried to fight, but his strength was absolute, immovable, and she knew with crushing certainty that she was going to die here, that her strange sanctuary had been an illusion all along. The vampire never got to bite down. One moment he was holding her, the next he was across the room, his body embedded in the wall with such force that cracks spider-webbed across the expensive plaster. Vladislav stood where the vampire had been, his hand still outstretched from throwing him, his eyes burning with a fury that made the air itself seem to crackle. "You dare enter my sanctuary?" His voice came out as a snarl, barely human. "You dare touch what is mine?" The other two vampires fled immediately, moving with supernatural speed toward the door. They never reached it. Vladislav was there first, his hand closing around one throat while his foot caught the other in the chest with enough force to shatter ribs. They hit the ground hard, gasping, and Mira saw real fear in their eyes as the vampire king stood over them. "Please," one of them whispered, "we did not know. We thought she was just a human." "She is not just anything." Vladislav hauled the silver-haired vampire from the wall with one hand, holding him by the throat. "She is under my protection, in my sanctuary, and you have violated every law of hospitality and protocol. Give me one reason I should not end you right now." "Mercy!" the vampire choked out. "Please, my lord, mercy!" Vladislav held him there for a long moment while Mira watched, frozen, barely breathing. She could see the war in his expression, fury and instinct demanding violence while control and reason urged restraint. Finally, with visible effort, he threw the vampire toward his companions. "Get out of my territory," he said, his voice cold as death itself. "Tell whoever sent you that the next vampire to approach Mira without my explicit permission will be delivered to the council in pieces. Now go, before I change my mind." They went, scrambling and limping, leaving trails of dark blood across the marble floors. The moment the door closed behind them, Vladislav turned to Mira, his expression transforming from rage to concern in a heartbeat. "Are you hurt?" He crossed to her in a blur, his hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch. "Did he bite you? Did any of them harm you?" "I'm okay," she managed, though her voice shook badly. "You came back. How did you know?" "I felt it." His hands finally settled on her shoulders, solid and real. "I felt your fear like a knife in my chest, and I knew something was wrong. I left the council mid-sentence, and if they had actually harmed you, I would have burned this entire city to ash." The intensity of his statement should have frightened her, but instead, it made something in her chest tighten with an emotion she was not ready to name. "Thank you for saving me." "Always." The word came out fierce, a vow. "I will always save you, Mira. You are mine to protect." "Yours," she echoed, and this time the possessiveness made her feel safe rather than trapped. He pulled her against his chest then, his arms wrapping around her carefully, as though she might break. She could hear the absence where his heartbeat should have been, but the solidity of him, the way he held her like she was precious, made her burrow closer rather than pull away. "I should have been here," he said into her hair. "I should have anticipated that others might try to reach you. You cannot guard me every moment." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "And you did come when I needed you. That's what matters." Something shifted in his eyes, softening. "When did you become so fearless?" "I have always been terrified. I just got good at doing things anyway." She managed a shaky smile. "Besides, I had faith you would come. Faith in a monster. Faith in you." She reached up without thinking and touched his face, her palm against his cool cheek. "Vladislav, you're not a monster, not to me." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for gentleness. "You make me want to be what you see when you look at me. Then be that." Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone. "Be the person who saves me, who protects me, who makes me feel like I matter." His eyes opened, meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You matter, Mira. You matter more than anything has mattered to me in 3 centuries. The kiss happened without conscious decision from either of them, lips meeting with a desperation born of fear and relief, and feelings neither had acknowledged until this moment. His mouth was cool against hers, controlled despite the passion she could feel thrumming through him, and she pressed closer, needing the contact, needing to confirm that both of them had survived this night intact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or at least she was breathing hard while he watched her with wonder, Mira found herself grinning despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "Well," she said, slightly breathless, "that happened. That should not have happened. but he made no move to step away, his arms still around her waist. "You are human. I am vampire. This is complicated at best, dangerous at worst. Everything about my life has been complicated and dangerous since I broke into your penthouse." She traced the line of his jaw with her fingers, marveling at the contrast between his cool skin and her warmth. "This is just one more impossible thing, and I find I do not care anymore about impossible. Mira." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I could hurt you so easily. I am constantly aware of how fragile you are, how one moment of lost control could end you. But you would not," she said it with complete certainty. "You could have fed from me 100 times by now, could have killed me that first night. You choose not to, every moment, and that choice means everything." He rested his forehead against hers, the gesture achingly intimate. "You have utterly destroyed my carefully ordered existence." "Good. From what I can tell, you needed some destroying." She pulled back, taking his hand. "Come on, let's clean up the blood and damage before it sets. I assume vampire blood stains as badly as human blood. Worse, actually." But he let her lead him toward the cleaning supplies, something like contentment softening his aristocratic features. They cleaned in companionable silence, Mira scrubbing at blood while Vladislav repaired the wall with vampire strength and what looked like minor magic. By the time they finished, dawn had begun to lighten the sky beyond the blackout curtains, and Vladislav moved toward the reinforced room where he apparently spent daylight hours. "Mira," he said from the doorway, "when I wake this evening, we need to discuss what this means, what we are to each other now." "I know what you are to me," she said simply. "The question is whether you can accept what I am to you." He studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile that transformed his face into something breathtaking. "I believe I already have. Sleep well, my brave girl. Sleep well, my vampire king." The door closed between them, but Mira did not feel alone. She felt, for the first time since her mother had died, like she had found somewhere she belonged, even if that somewhere was impossible and dangerous and completely insane. She slept that day with a smile on her face, and when she woke at sunset, she found Vladislav waiting in the living room with a seriousness that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "We need to talk," he said without preamble, "about what happened last night and about what it means for your safety going forward." Mira sat across from him, suddenly nervous. "Are you going to tell me it was a mistake, that we should forget about it?" "No." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I'm going to tell you that keeping you secret is no longer possible. The entire Midnight Court now knows you exist, which means you are a target for anyone who wishes to harm me through you. So what do we do? I present you formally to the court as someone under my protection. I make it clear that harming you means declaring war on me personally." He met her eyes. "But to do that effectively, I need to claim you in a way that vampire society will understand and respect." "What does that mean?" "It means I need to mark you as mine, to forge a blood bond that will broadcast your status to every vampire in the city." He reached out and took her hand. "It means asking you to become part of my world in a way that is permanent and irreversible." Mira's heart raced. "You want to turn me into a vampire?" "No, not yet. Not unless you someday wish it." He squeezed her fingers gently. "A blood bond is different. I would feed from you, and you would drink a small amount of my blood. It creates a connection, allows me to sense when you are in danger, gives you some protection against other vampires. But it also marks you as bonded to me, which in vampire society is a claim as serious as marriage in human culture." "So you are proposing to me, basically?" "In a sense, yes." A hint of vulnerability entered his expression. "I know this is fast. Know that we have only known each other weeks. But I also know that you have become essential to me in ways I cannot fully articulate. I want you safe, want you protected, want the world to know that you are mine and I am yours. Will you accept a blood bond with me, Mira Frost?" She should have been terrified, should have demanded time to think, should have run from the idea of literally binding herself to a vampire. Instead, she found herself nodding, the decision feeling right in a way few things in her life ever had. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will bond with you." Relief and joy flickered across his face before he controlled it. "You are certain? Once done, this cannot easily be undone. You will be connected to me, drawn to me, and every vampire will sense my claim on you. I am certain. She moved from her chair to kneel before him, placing her hands on his knees. I have never been more certain of anything. You saved me, protected me, made me feel like I matter. I want this bond. I want you. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch reverent. Then I will make you mine in the eyes of all my kind, and I will spend eternity ensuring you never regret this choice. How do we do this? Come here. He shifted, pulling her up to sit across his lap, one arm supporting her back. The bond requires an exchange of blood. I will feed from you first, just a small amount. Then you will drink from me. The magic will handle the rest. Will it hurt? No. He brushed her hair back from her neck. I promise, Mira, I will make this good for you. She tilted her head, offering her throat, trusting him completely. His cool fingers trailed across her pulse point, and she felt the scrape of fangs against her skin for just a moment before he bit down. The sensation was nothing like she expected. Instead of pain, pleasure flooded her nervous system, warm and intoxicating, making her gasp and arch against him. She felt him drinking, felt the pull of her blood leaving her body, but it created a connection rather than a loss, as though he was pulling part of her into himself and leaving something of himself behind. He drew back after only moments, licking the wound closed with vampire magic that left barely a mark. His eyes glowed molten silver, his lips stained red with her blood, and he looked at her with such raw hunger and affection that she trembled. Your turn, he said, his voice rough. He bit his own wrist with sharp efficiency, and dark blood welled up immediately. Drink, Mira. Seal the bond. She took his wrist in both hands and pressed her mouth to the wound, forcing herself past the initial strangeness to actually swallow. His blood tasted like copper and wine and winter nights, strange but not unpleasant, and the moment it hit her system, she felt the bond snap into place. Power rushed through her, not her own but borrowed from him. And suddenly, she could sense him in a way that went beyond physical proximity. She felt his emotions, his fierce protectiveness, his desire, his affection that had grown into something deeper and more permanent. She felt the hunger he held in check, the centuries of loneliness, the tentative hope that maybe finally he had found someone who could stand beside him in the darkness. When she pulled back, the wound had already closed. She stared at Vladislav with wonder, seeing him through new eyes, feeling the thread of connection between them like a living thing. I can feel you, she whispered. Inside my head, in my chest, I can feel you. And I can feel you. He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. Your warmth, your life, your ridiculous courage. The bond is complete, Mira. You are mine now, and I am yours for as long as you wish it. Forever, she said without hesitation. I choose forever. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and she tasted her own blood on his lips mixed with the strange flavor of his. The kiss went on until she was dizzy with it, clinging to his shoulders while he held her like she was both precious and necessary. When they finally broke apart, he smiled against her lips. I need to present you to the court tomorrow night. They will want to meet the human who captured their king's interest. Will they try to hurt me? Not if they value their continued existence. His arms tightened around her. They will see the bond mark, understand what you mean to me, and adjust their behavior accordingly. Any who do not will learn why I have ruled the Eastern bloodline for 3 centuries. The court presentation happened the following night in an underground chamber that looked like something from a Gothic cathedral. Vampires filled the space, dozens of them, all pale skin and dark clothes, and eyes that tracked Mira's movement with varying degrees of curiosity and hunger. Vladislav kept her close, one arm around her waist in a possessive gesture that no one could misinterpret. He presented her formally, his voice carrying through the chamber with absolute authority. This is Mira Frost, bonded to me by blood and by choice. She is under my protection, my domain, my heart. Any who threaten her threaten me. Any who harm her will face my full wrath. Let this be known throughout the midnight court and beyond. Silence followed his declaration, heavy and charged. Then, one by one, the vampires began to bow, acknowledging the bond in Vladislav's claim. The silver-haired vampire who had attacked her was conspicuously absent, and Mira suspected he would not be returning to court any time soon. A female vampire stepped forward from the crowd, her white hair braided with silver thread, her expression calculating. "My lord, forgive my forwardness, but the human seems fragile for one bonded to the vampire king. What protection does she offer you in return for this unprecedented honor?" "She offers me something I had forgotten existed," Vladislav replied, his tone brooking no argument. "She offers me companionship without agenda, affection without fear, a reason to care about the world beyond power and politics. That is worth more than any supernatural ability." The female vampire bowed deeper. "Then we welcome Mira Frost to the Midnight Court and recognize her as bonded to our king." The rest of the presentation passed in a blur of introductions and formal exchanges. Mira clung to Vladislav's hand, overwhelmed by the attention and the sheer number of predators in one space. But true to his word, no one threatened her, and by the time they returned to the penthouse hours later, she was exhausted, but unharmed. "You did beautifully," Vladislav said as they entered the sanctuary of his home. "Half the court is terrified of you now." "Why would they be terrified of me?" "Because you somehow accomplished what no one has managed in 3 centuries. You made me care about something beyond my own power." He pulled her into his arms. "That makes you dangerous in ways they do not understand," she laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I am the least dangerous person I know." "Perhaps that is precisely what makes you so dangerous." He kissed her forehead. "Sleep, my brave girl. Tomorrow we can discuss what normal life looks like for a human bonded to the vampire king." But normal was the last thing their life became. Over the following months, Mira found herself drawn deeper into vampire society, attending court functions on Vladislav's arm, mediating disputes between vampires and humans, becoming a bridge between the two worlds. The bond between them deepened, growing from connection to something that felt like soul, deep certainty. She learned the politics of the Midnight Court, the ancient feuds and alliances that shaped vampire society. She met other bonded humans and learned that her situation, while rare, was not entirely unprecedented. Some had been bonded for decades, aging slowly due to regular consumption of vampire blood, and they told her stories that made her understand the weight of her choice. "Do you regret it?" Vladislav asked one night as they lay together in her bed, her back to his chest, his arms around her waist. "Bonding to me, entering this world." "Not even for a moment." She laced her fingers through his. "Do you regret finding me in your bed that night?" "Finding you was the best thing to happen to me in 300 years. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Though I reserve the right to still be annoyed that you picked my lock so easily." She laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "I will make it up to you by staying for the next 300 years. His expression turned serious. "Is that what you want? To eventually turn to become what I am?" "Someday, yes." She had thought about it often, the reality of what it would mean to age while he stayed eternally unchanged. "Not now, not yet. I want to live as human for a while longer, experience the daylight, grow into who I am becoming. But eventually, when the time is right, I want forever with you." "Then you will have it." He kissed her softly. "I will give you everything, Mira. Time, eternity, love, protection, whatever you need. I just need you. You have me. You have had me since the moment I found you curled up in my bed looking like something I was meant to protect." His smile turned self-deprecating. "I think I fell in love with you that first night and simply refused to acknowledge it." "Love?" Her heart stuttered. They had danced around the word for months, both feeling it but neither quite brave enough to say it first. "Love," he confirmed. "I love you, Mira Frost, completely, devotedly, eternally." Tears pricked her eyes, happy ones this time. "I love you too, Vladislav. My vampire king, my protector, my home." He wiped away her tears with careful fingers. "Do not cry, beloved. These are happy tears, I promise." She kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the contact. "I broke into your penthouse looking for one night of safety, and instead I found a lifetime of love. Technically an eternity of love once you turn." But his eyes were soft with affection, "Though I suppose we should start with the lifetime first." They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of forever, of promises kept and futures entwined. Afterward, as Mira drifted toward sleep in the circle of Vladislav's arms, she thought about the girl who had picked that lock months ago, desperate and alone and convinced she had no value. That girl had been wrong. She had possessed the most valuable thing of all, the courage to keep surviving, keep trying, keep reaching for safety even when the world seemed determined to deny it to her. That courage had led her here, to impossible love with an immortal being, to a place in a hidden world, to a future that promised both adventure and belonging. "What are you thinking about?" Vladislav asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "How grateful I am that you did not kill me that first night." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "I am grateful for my restraint as well. Murdering you would have been tremendously inconvenient given how much I love you now." "So romantic," she teased, but she was smiling. "I am 300 years old. Romance was not really my generation's strength," but he tilted her face up for another kiss. "Though I'm learning, thanks to you." "Good. You have eternity to practice. With you, eternity sounds perfect." The months turned into a year, and the year into two. Mira grew into her role as the Vampire King's bonded, confident and capable, no longer the desperate girl who had broken into a penthouse, but a woman who stood beside immortal power with grace and strength. She finished her degree online, started a non-profit helping homeless youth, used Vladislav's resources to make real change in the city that had once chewed her up. On the second anniversary of the night she had picked that lock, Vladislav presented her with a gift, the deed to the Obsidian Tower, transferred into her name. "You are giving me a building?" She stared at the paperwork in disbelief. "I am giving you security." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "So that you never have to feel powerless or homeless again. The penthouse will always be yours, no matter what happens, no matter where eternity takes us." She turned in his embrace, tears streaming down her face. "How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it. You chose to survive, chose to be brave, chose to break into my penthouse specifically." He wiped her tears away gently. "And I chose to see the value in the brave, stubborn girl sleeping in my bed. We chose each other, Mira. That is better than luck. I love you so much it sometimes hurts. I know the feeling." He kissed her forehead. "Though vampire hearts do not technically beat, mine belongs entirely to you." That night, they stood together on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the city lights. Mira leaned against Vladislav's chest, his arms wrapped around her, feeling completely safe and completely loved. "Do you ever wonder how different things would be if I had picked a different building that night?" she asked. "Yes, I would still be alone, slowly forgetting what it feels like to care about anything. The world would be colder, darker, emptier." His arms tightened. "Thank you for breaking into my home, Mira Frost. Thank you for not killing me, Vladislav Drăculești." They stood there until dawn began to lighten the sky, and then he retreated to his protected chamber while she slept in the bed they had shared more nights than not, secure in the knowledge that when sunset came, he would be there again, constant as the night itself. Years passed, beautiful and strange and full of love. When Mira turned 30, she sat Vladislav down and told him she was ready, ready to become what he was, ready for forever. "Are you certain?" he asked, as he had asked about everything important in their relationship. "There is no going back from this, Mira. You will lose the daylight, lose your humanity, gain immortality and all its complications." "I am certain." She took his hands. "I have lived as human, accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, helped who I wanted to help. Now I want forever with you, and I am ready to pay the price for it." "It is not a price if you choose it freely." He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Very well. We will do this properly, with ceremony and witnesses. The entire court will celebrate the transformation of my bonded into one of us." The transformation happened on a winter night exactly 8 years after she had broken into his penthouse, surrounded by the midnight court, in the same underground chamber where she had first been presented as bonded. Vladislav performed the ritual himself, draining her to the edge of death and then feeding her his blood until the change took hold. Dying hurt worse than anything she had ever experienced, but Vladislav held her through it, whispering promises and love and encouragement as her heart slowed and finally stopped. The moment stretched into eternity, pain and darkness, and the terrifying certainty that she was leaving life behind. Then, the vampire blood hit her system properly, and she was reborn. Power flooded through her, inhuman and intoxicating. Her senses exploded outward, letting her hear heartbeats of humans blocks away, smell the complexity of the world in a way she never had before, see in the darkness as though it were daylight. She felt the bond with Vladislav intensify 100-fold, their connection now vampire to vampire rather than vampire to human. When she opened her eyes, they glowed silver like his, and when she smiled, she felt the sharp points of new fangs in her mouth. "How do you feel?" Vladislav asked, his voice tight with concern and hope. "Alive," she said, then laughed. "Or undead, technically, but alive in ways I never was before. This is incredible." Relief and joy broke across his face, and he pulled her into his arms, spinning her in a circle while the court cheered around them. "Welcome to eternity, my love. Welcome to forever." She kissed him in front of the entire midnight court, claiming him as thoroughly as he had claimed her that first night when he had chosen not to kill the girl in his bed. They had all of eternity now, endless nights to explore their love, to rule together, to face whatever challenges immortality brought. Mira Frost had broken into a penthouse looking for one night of safety. Instead, she had found a home, a love, and a future that stretched beyond the boundaries of mortal understanding. She had been nobody, nothing, so insignificant that magical wards could not even detect her. Now she stood as vampire nobility, bonded and transformed and beloved, proof that value did not come from power or magic, but from courage, from survival, from the simple act of choosing to keep living even when the world tried to break you. "Forever," she whispered against Vladislav's lips. "Forever," he agreed, and they faced eternity together. The vampire king and the girl who had accidentally stolen his heart by sleeping in his bed. Years turned into decades, and decades into centuries. They ruled the Eastern bloodline together, Mira growing into her power and position until she was as respected and feared as Vladislav himself. But in the quiet moments, in the sanctuary of their penthouse, they were simply two beings who loved each other, who had found in each other what they had been missing for lifetimes. On the 100th anniversary of the night she had picked his lock, they returned to the penthouse bedroom where it had all begun. The bed was the same. Burgundy silk replaced countless times, but always in the same style, a memorial to the moment that had changed both their eternities. "Do you ever regret it?" Mira asked, lying in his arms, exactly as she had that first night, though now she could hear the absence of heartbeats instead of being defined by her own. "Taking in a homeless girl instead of killing her like you should have?" "Not once in 100 years. Vladislav pulled her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Mira. Finding you in my bed was the moment my eternal life finally gained meaning." "I love you," she said simply, the words as true now as they had been when she first spoke them. "I love you," he replied. "Through all of time, through eternity itself, I love you." Outside, the city lights glittered like stars, and inside their sanctuary, two vampires held each other and remembered the night a desperate girl had broken into a penthouse seeking one night of safety, and had instead found everything she had never known she needed: love, belonging, purpose, and a forever that would never end. The girl who had been nothing, who had been invisible even to magic, had become the center of a vampire king's world, and the vampire who had been alone for centuries, who had forgotten what it meant to care, had learned to love again. Their forever stretched ahead of them, endless and beautiful and full of possibility, born from a single act of desperate courage and a choice to see value where logic said none existed. In the end, that was all love ever required: courage and choice and the willingness to believe in impossible things. Mira and Vladislav had found all three in each other, and it had given them eternity.